Okay, so we are up to the bottom of page 105. Okay, and just to remind everyone, when we speak about desire, we're speaking about really connecting to our inner knowledge, because we said that the way that we connect to that is through that rotzen, it's through that inner desire, which is ultimately what tefillah is all about. Tefillah is not about a shopping list. It's not about coming before Hashem with a shopping list of all the different things that we want, but rather it's about accessing our innermost desire, because the way that we can access our innermost desire is by sort of bottling it down to the things that a person really, really wants. That's my essential desire. I want this because of this, because of this, because of this, till you get back to your most basic elemental desires and needs, which is sort of intrinsic to who you are as a person, who you are as a human being. That is your innermost rotzen. Now, the way that davening works, he explains, is because you can actually change yourself. And therefore, it's not that you come to Hashem with a shopping list and then he says, okay, you can have this, but rather after davening, you're a different person than you were beforehand. And therefore, although you may not have been deserving of something beforehand, once you finish your experience of coming close to Hashem, of spending time, taking time out of your day to actually speak to the creator of the world, then in that case, it comes down to you, because it's so, the way he puts it, he brings the Yiddish word, it's an Einfall, which means that it actually comes into you, as long as the person really sincerely desires and has that inner will, that inner rotzen, and connects to Hashem, then in that case, they've changed and they've become a different person. And therefore, Hashem sort of, as it were, fills their innermost self, their innermost rotzen, because they are now deserving of it in a way that they weren't previously. Now, you might ask me, why is it that very often I go to shul on a Shabbos, or I go to shul on a, especially in a weekday mincha, and I don't feel like a different person after I've finished the experience? And I would say two things. Number one, I would say that there are times when you will feel different, and there are times that you won't. I spoke about the girls. I spoke to this to the girls about this. We were learning about Matan Torah, and it's almost like a cyclical relationship in which we do things because we have to do them, and then following that stage, then we'll have a moment where we actually really feel kind of, we can appreciate why we're doing them, or we can have that moment, that burst of inspiration, that burst of sort of motivation, of understanding, like, oh, now it all makes sense. And then once we've had that, then we'll come back again. This is similar to what he spoke about in the first chapter. Then we come back to that atem shamoya tishma'u, which means that you do it because you know it's right, and because you have to do it, and because you're listening to Hashem. And then you go round again, and then you once again sort of climb up to the point at which it becomes something which is meaningful. And then once again, it will go round, and you'll keep having that cyclical relationship. And therefore, you won't always feel that something is changing, but nevertheless, the very act of putting on your tefillin, the very act of going to shul and davening, the very act of doing a chesed, all of those things each time, then that is something which is inherently going to change you, even though sometimes you're only doing it because you know it is the right thing to do. Does that make sense? It's like that cycle of, I'm doing it because it's the right thing, I'm doing it because I feel it. Then I'm doing it because it's the right thing again, and I'm doing it because I feel it. And we've got to get used to that. We can't always expect to be like, wow, I feel incredible, I feel amazing. Doesn't always work like that. You're going to have to sort of, go around and be able to sort of balance the mundane with that which is elevated as well. Page 105 at the bottom. The spiritual path, he says, is always a paradox. Real honor finds only those who flee from it. Right? That's the paradox there, yeah? Because the person who wants honor, then he's not going to get the real honor, but the person who runs away from it, he will. Really flee. He says in brackets, a man once complained to the Chazon Ish, who was the great sage, he lived in Bnei Brak, died in the 50s, that he had fled from honor all of his life, and it had still not found him. Chazon Ish gently chided him, you've been too busy looking over your shoulder, meaning you really wanted the honor. It's that the person is trying to show humility because they want people to honor them for being humble. Yeah, there's such a thing. Yeah, doesn't work like that. So the Chazon Ish said, you've always been looking over your shoulder. Real content is found only in those who are really empty. Now, that means not empty of self, as he explained before, but rather it's the person who has the ability for Hashem to actually fill themselves. They've got that, I'm willing and able to be makabel, to accept something upon myself which is transcendent, which is divine, which I know I will be able to be makabel, I'll be able to be receiving. So if their person makes space for that, then they have something which is real, as it were, inside of them. Put in rotzen terms, he says, of that will, that desire, this clarifying process means yielding all one's rotzen to Hashem. Top of page 106. Meaning my rotzen, my will, I'm not going to think about myself. Ultimately, this is the highest level, but rather I'm going to think about what Hashem's rotzen is, what Hashem's will is. This is the meaning. What it says in the Mishnah, make your will His will. Give up your will so that you want what Hashem wants. I mean, that's the highest level. This does not mean becoming a passive, lifeless individual. On the contrary, one must passionately want what Hashem wants. This level is given as a gift to the degree that one gains control over one's own negative drives and interests. I mean, as long as I'm preoccupied with my negativity, as long as I'm preoccupied in trying to gossip about the other person, trying to be jealous about them and trying to put them down, is it any wonder that I don't have space for positivity, for godliness? Meaning, where am I going to put it? I'm too busy chasing after the next luxury or insulting the person who's sitting opposite me at work or being jealous of my neighbor who just bought a new car. And then I kind of like sit there expecting, I don't feel spiritual. Well, of course you don't feel spiritual. Where do you want the spirituality to go in your life? You're preoccupied with yourself. You're preoccupied completely with your ego. So therefore, the first thing you have to be able to do is to gain control. What are my negativity? Where are my drives? Where are my interests? Can I control them? Doesn't mean I shouldn't want things. It doesn't mean I shouldn't want a nice house or a nice car. But do I want it in a negative way or do I want it in a positive way? When a person is able to do that, is able to overcome those negative drives and interests, then he can start working on that positivity or maybe alongside each other, which is, why do I want the things that I want? Is my will close to Hashem's will? You know, a great sort of, test of this is learning Torah. When a person begins to learn Torah, it can often be an experience which is very difficult. It's very challenging because I can't translate properly. I don't find this meaningful. I'm not going to get a degree from it. I probably won't get any recognition. No one's going to give me a promotion in my job. All of the things that normally would follow knowledge don't apply when we're sitting and we're learning Torah. However, when a person gets used to it, when a person feels what it can do to them, when a person feels full in a way that they haven't ever by studying anything else, then all of a sudden they enjoy it. And they don't enjoy it because they're going to get a promotion or because they're going to get money or because any other reason. They enjoy it because it's the Ratzon Hashem. Because they know that when they're sitting and they're learning, they're fulfilling the will of Hashem and they like that. They enjoy. That's Aseh Ritzono Chaki Ritzono. So your will is the same as His will. And it becomes something which is not that you have to force yourself to do, but it becomes something which is enjoyable. That's the type of place that we should try to get to, where Shabbos is not a chore. It's not like, oh, when's it going out? Quick, right? Not long left. We had a teacher who used to smoke. Again, when I was in school, that was okay. It wasn't like a big deal, right? So he used to smoke. He was a rabbi. And I remember I went to stay at him for Shabbos. Again, in those days, you could do that. You could have students to stay at your house for Shabbos. Can you imagine nowadays? No such thing. So two of us went to stay with him for Shabbos. And he told us that on Shabbos afternoon, he used to be so eager for Shabbos to go out because he wanted a cigarette. He was addicted and he couldn't smoke the whole of Shabbos. So he was waiting, sort of, looking at the clock, when is Shabbos going to go out? Then he realized himself, this is ridiculous. Like, that's not how we're supposed to spend Shabbos. Supposed to enjoy Shabbos. Supposed to be that I don't want Shabbos to go out, not that I'm looking at the clock and waiting for Shabbos to go out. So he said then and there, he decided he's not going to smoke until Sunday morning. Because there's no point in that case. Okay, fine. So there's nothing to look. When Shabbos goes out, then Shabbos goes out. I still can't smoke anyway till Sunday morning. So nothing to do with the time, the summer or winter times of Shabbos or anything. And that way, he said, I'm not going to be sitting, watching and waiting for Shabbos to go out. Because again, Shabbos shouldn't be something which is a chore and we're waiting to go out. It should be something which, it's Shabbos, I enjoy it. I'm in tune. My neshama, my body and my soul are in tune with Hashem's will. And just as Hashem's will is for us to have a day of rest, so my will is to have a day of rest. We have to be honest with ourselves as well, by the way. It's very easy to trick ourselves and say, yeah, I love it. I really am enjoying it. But you can be honest with ourselves and say, no, actually, at the moment, I'm not there yet. I find this difficult, find this challenging for such and such a reason. But okay, as long as we wish to will, to want, to aspire, and we want to get there, that's our deepermost rotzen, that's our desire to get there, then we will. And we can make our rotzen, our desire, in line with Hashem's will. So all of the mitzvahs, there's all different sorts of examples of that. And that's what it's supposed to feel. That's a person who's living a happy, fulfilled Jewish life. It's not something imposed upon them. Do you see what I mean? Where it's like, this is me, and now God has done this. Yeah, and he's put me in a straitjacket. Yeah, that's, everyone can tell that's not healthy. And it's not the way it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be my will, God's will. We were going on the same path. We're working together. That's where we want to get to. He continues, 106. So the meditation and work of tefillah is to identify one's deepest core and then to yield it. In effect, one is saying, Hashem, this is who I am. This is everything I am. All meaning in my life is concentrated here in my deepest desire. Take it, Hashem. Do with it as you see fit, because I give myself to you. This is a high, very, very high level. Okay? Very high level. But at least we can grasp what a person who's worked upon themselves, really worked upon themselves, tefillah, what they're doing when they're davening, the kind of levels that one can reach to. He says, actually, this is the secret of Torah living in general. In tefillah, in davening, it is made explicit. The paradox of tefillah, which requires the most work, is yielding rotzen and at the same time building it. One controls one's own desires until they've not felt, and then concentrates on amplifying the higher rotzen desire which results. At the same time, one allows one's desires to be richly felt, and then sublimates them into service of Hashem. Difficult, right? Know yourself well. Rav Wolbe says, the first step to any real growth is knowing yourself. That's pretty scary because a lot of people don't want to know themselves. A lot of people want to know the person they think that everyone wants them to be, or the person that they should be because it's expedient for their job, for their life, for their spouse, or whatever it is. And that's what they want to know, or they want others to know. But Rav Wolbe says the first thing is you have to know yourself. Once you know who you are, you know yourself, honestly. Sometimes that's, a bit painful. But once you know who you are, where you're up to, now it's time to actually work on being in tune with Hashem, because you've got a self, you're honest with it. Then, okay, how can I at the same time be in tune with Hashem? He says, this explains too, last paragraph, why our tefillahs are composed of requests, desires expressed. That's exactly the medium of prayer. Prayer is the work of changing desires. The work of prayer is work on Ratzon, that inner will. The Nefesh HaChaim explains this as follows. We phrase our prayers as requests because we are working on our Ratzon, our inner will. But when we ask for all the things which we mention in Tefillah, we should be asking for those things for Hashem and not for us. Meaning, why do I want those things? Why am I desiring, that paranosa, that I have a good livelihood, or that I have health, or that I have intelligence? Why am I asking? Use our desire for Him, for Hashem. Give us wisdom for your service, Hashem. Give us health to perform your mitzvahs and so on. A remarkable exercise of self-development, using our potentially selfish motivations to sublimate those very motivations to a higher purpose. So we take those things which could be selfish, we take them and we elevate them and we say, I want these things for a higher purpose. Of course, some thought will show that it has to be this way. Standing before Hashem with a list of personal requests, all for completely selfish reasons, would be a chutzpah. That is not service. Now, I should add, we have to be realistic with ourselves, which is the following. If a person wants and needs, those things in order that Hashem, in order that he can serve Hashem better. So I only want health so I can serve Hashem better. I only want to be wise so I can understand Hashem's Torah better, and so on and so forth. Then, of course, by all means, that's what he should be asking, and that's where we should aim. However, if we're not up to there, and that is quite a high level. Yeah, if we're not there, realistically, we want things because we do want things, and we should still ask Hashem for them. It's important to still daven and to still talk to Hashem, and even if we don't have the ideal, loftiest goals and reasons in mind. He continues. The Nefesh HaChaim points out we learn many of the aspects and details of prayer from Chana. She came to the sanctuary and prayed for a child. What the Nefesh HaChaim states briefly, what we can understand in more detail. We're told that Chana prays very powerfully, even somehow going beyond the apparent limits of what should be said, right? Chana, this is a story in Shmuel Aleph, and Chana doesn't have a child for many, many years, and she comes to the Beis HaMikdash and she's just prays, from the bottom of her heart. She actually is the first one who ever davens the Amidah, the silent prayer. The concept of silent prayer originates from Chana. That's the way that she prayed, and in fact, Eli, who was the Kohen Gadol, Eli, who was the high priestess, obviously a very educated person and a wise man, didn't know what she was doing because no one had ever prayed that way before. In previous times, their prayer was always out loud, and therefore he suspects that maybe she's drunk because she's standing there and she's going like this, and she's, when you walk into a shul and everyone's doing that, and if you ever davened at an airport, by the way, you feel like a real crazy, you think like everyone's looking at you, right? Because you're standing there like shockingly like this, your lips are moving, no sound is coming out, right? And what are these, any onlookers, what are they thinking? If you've ever tried even worse than that, it's davening with your talis and tefillin at the airport, yeah? Because then you've got it all going on. And you know what people must think, I have no idea. It's funny because I just, sometimes I go to the prayer room, sometimes it's not convenient or it's a bit cramped and everything. So I've kind of got to the point where I don't really care anymore. Maybe it helps if you anyway got a big couple sits this and a beard. So they're anyway looking at you funny. So tell us and tefillin as well and shockling a bit, what's the difference? But Chana is she's davening in a way that Eli has never seen before. And again, he suspects her of being drunk. And Hashem actually says to her, no, she's not drunk at all. She's a kashera. She's a very righteous woman. And she therefore originates the idea, the concept of silent prayer. Amazing thing. Through this one sincere lady who came to pray for a child is where we get a lot of the halachas, a lot of the laws of prayer from. So he explains, the Beis HaLevi says that she went so far when in this prayer of hers to threaten extreme action in order to get her way. She told Hashem that if he refused her request for a child, she would seclude herself with a man other than her husband and cause herself to be subjected to the test of the sota, which means when a woman is suspected of unfaithfulness and Hashem's name is erased into the water. When the suspected sota drinks the water, the result depends on the truth of her behavior. If she's guilty, she suffers a miserable end. If she's innocent, she becomes pregnant and gives birth. That's a promise in the Torah. So Chana almost like threatens God. Hashem, I intend to do this. And if I do, because I haven't been unfaithful, you'll have to give me a child because you promised this in the Torah. So she forced the divine hand, which is a very sharp prayer. I mean, we don't normally talk to God in that way. You have to do this or else. Yeah, don't try that at home. But he says the meaning is clear. Chana is motivated only for Hashem's honor and glory. The intensity of her prayer was really the following. Hashem, by undergoing the test of being the unfaithful, I shall definitely have a child. But I'm asking you for a child without having to go through that experience, because that would mean erasing your name. Allow me the inevitable result without desecrating your honor. And we see she, in fact, was sincere, page 108. She's granted, the child she was granted was dedicated to Hashem from the earliest possible age. She presents her son. This is the son that she's davened for many, many years. Her son Shmuel, which means Hashem listened. Shmuel, God listened. She presents him to the sanctuary, the Mishkan, to be raised in Hashem's service for the rest of his life. Her very desire for this child in the first place was dedicated to Hashem. She wanted a son for Hashem's sake. She sublimated her desire to be a mother to Avodas Hashem, the service of Hashem. She didn't want a child to keep her company. She didn't want a child to look after her, to smile at her home. She wants a child who's going to be able to be the next leader of the Jewish people, who's able to serve Hashem. And that's what he becomes, Shmuel. Because from a very young age, he's actually taken to the Mishkan, where he gets used to the service and he becomes one of the greatest leaders of the Jewish people. He eventually is the person who appoints King David to be the king of Israel. How fitting. The name she gave that son born of her prayer, Shmuel, Hashem hears. The perfect source for the Jewish people to learn the laws of tefillah, of davening, the Jewish woman using her own desire to be a mother for Hashem's service entirely. As we said before, she takes the possibly one of the strongest desires in the world that exists, the desire of a mother to have a child, a woman to have a child. She takes that and she says, I'm going to use this for Hashem, making my will into his will. And that's something which is very powerful. That's what we learn the whole concept of our silent prayer of Amidah from. Stop there.